Hey guys, so I'm working on guitar number 56 here, the Zero Coat guitar, and recently I did the end wedge, of course. Perhaps you saw that video. Now what I'm going to be doing, since I put these beautiful maple purfling strips on the side of the end wedge, I actually want to carry that purfling theme there onto the side binding. I'm sorry, onto the binding, onto the sides. Now doing side purfling is a little bit different than just doing regular top purfling. It's a little bit tricky, and so that's what I'm going to be doing today. What I have is my binding strip, and then I have these maple purfling strips. Now you can actually buy binding strips. I know Stu Mac has them, probably LMI, and I'm sure other places as well. You can buy strips that already have the fiber strip glued to it or attached to it in whatever way. And that's fine, but then you're limited to the options that are available on that online catalog. Now in this case, the only thing close to what I have here that I could find that was available was ebony with white dyed fiber strips. This is actually maple, and it has more of sort of a cream color than the brilliant white of the dyed fiber strips, so it would actually look off if I just used that commercial option. So I'm going to show you how to make this stuff yourself. Now the traditional way of making side purfling like this is simply to have a large wide sheet of this veneer material, or this purfling material, and glue that to a large wide blank of wood that you're going to cut these strips from. So then when you cut out the individual binding strips, you have that white stripe on the bottom of each one. And that's a fine way of doing it. For me, I don't often cut binding strips. It's not something I'm set up to do very well, so I end up purchasing these a lot. And what I like doing is I like having on hand a variety of different colored strips like this, purfling strips, and a variety of different binding, and I like having the ability to be able to play with it. I have some simple jigs here that give me the ability to just take what I have as far as these extra purfling strips and stick them down to the binding, glue them to the binding like you see here. And then I'm going to show you how we go ahead and bend that. And so then, of course, in the end, when this gets glued on, you will have a nice white strip that comes up and meets this white strip. That's the goal. So the jig that I'm using here is really no different than a joining board. It's just a specialty joining board that I've made to fit the length of these binding strips. I've also made the joining board more narrow because normally you would use a joining board for book matching plates, and in this case it doesn't need to be this wide thing. It can be nice and narrow because I'm only using it for the binding strips. The only other thing I've added to the joining board here is this long wedge. This piece of wood is wedge shaped, it's tapered, so that when I slide it into place it creates nice even pressure all along that joint. So once the purfling strip is in place, I then take a small piece of scrap wood and just go over the whole thing. Anywhere where the purfling strip is riding up just slightly, I'll take that block of wood and just simply press it down flush with the binding strip. And that's really it. Then I clean up the glue squeeze out and wait 45 minutes and it's good to go. And don't forget, of course, to either use wax paper or packaging tape underneath the binding strip here to prevent yourself from gluing your binding strip to the jig itself. And for the glue, by the way, I am using Titebond Original. And then, of course, I repeat the same process for the remaining binding strips. After the glue set, I thicknessed the binding strips on my Purfling thicknesser. If you watch one of my previous videos, you can see how to make this simple jig with an old plane blade. And now the binding strips can be bent really in the same way that you would bend any set of binding strips. You might expect for the glue to come apart, to loosen up, and for the two strips to come apart under the heat of the process. And I'm not sure that it actually doesn't do that. In fact, what I suspect happens is that the glue does come apart because the temperatures are so high that that's exactly what you would expect it to do. But because it's held in place, after everything cools, the glue then reforms its bond with the two pieces, especially since those two pieces are still held fast against each other. So that's always the biggest question I think people have in their heads is what glue can I use here so that the two pieces don't come apart? And I've actually heard of people using super glue as well with the same results. So I actually wouldn't stress the glue coming apart as much as you might think I would. Alright, and so here are the bent binding pieces. And just one thing I want you guys to notice here, and that's that the Purfling strip is on the opposite side of each matching piece, right? So there's two of these treble side pieces, and if this white strip was on the same side on each one, then when we actually place it on here, on the body itself, you would end up with one Purfling strip down here where it's supposed to be, and the other one would actually be up on this top surface, which wouldn't make any sense. What we want to have is that Purfling strip on this side to the inside, right? A mistake you could make there would be then for the other one, instead of having the Purfling strip on this side, if you did it the wrong way, you would have that Purfling strip up on top, right there. So you really just have to stop and think about that as you're loading the Purfling strips into the bender. You have to alternate the direction that you place them so that they get bent with the Purfling strip to the inside on both pieces. So, like you see here, in the end, if you place them side by side like this, you should have one that looks black on the top, one that looks white on the top. Same with these two base side pieces, one that looks black on the top, one that looks white on the top. So that in the end, those Purfling strips are both to the inside. And the same thing is on these cutaway pieces that I have taped together right now. Taping them together just keeps them from unbending a little bit. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.